welcome back! Today we're continuing our discussion of Monkey, the translation of Journey to the West, an abridgment by Arthur Waley. When we last left our hero, the Monkey King, he was trapped under a mountain made by Buddha's fingers. And there he's going to stay for 400 years, which means we're going to put him to the side for now. And it will be a few chapters before he regains his freedom. Instead, we're going to change gears and move over to India, where Buddha is sitting. As we're continuing our discussion of this wonderful book, remember that I see myself more as a fan of this book than any kind of expert. And no matter how much I study it and the culture it embodies, there's still so much more that I'm sure goes over my head. Even the graphic novel has really intelligent things to say. For example, the 6th volume of Wei Dongchen's wonderful graphic novel adaptation, The Monkey King, where Lord of the Rings depicts a moral universe comprised of black and white, good and evil. The Journey to the West is a much more nuanced meditation on the many, sometimes contradictory, impulses that guide our behavior for good or ill. There are no inherently good or evil beings in Journey to the West. Even the most virtuous are capable of succumbing to negative impulses. And even the most violent and merciless are not beyond redemption. That's going to be very important and very key to Chapter 8. So Chapter 8 establishes really the premise for the rest of the book. Buddha is looking at the world around him and he sees that in China, there's a lot of people that don't know what they're doing. They're making lots of mistakes, they're all kinds of miserable. And so he sees that the people of China need the Buddhist scriptures. But not only that, they need a scripture seeker to come from China and come get the Buddhist scriptures. Obviously he could just send and airdrop the Buddhist scriptures there, but that wouldn't do as much good as having someone actually undergo the journey of it, attaining the scriptures. And so Bodhisattva Kuan Yin, the goddess of mercy, who we saw previously, undertakes the job of finding a scripture seeker. Now really quickly, I'm going to try to define the difference between a Buddha and a Bodhisattva. From what I've read, it seems that a Buddha and a Bodhisattva really attain the same rank. They've both achieved enlightenment, but they have different goals. A Buddha is more interested in meditation, whereas a Bodhisattva is a more active kind of person who goes out to alleviate the suffering of the world. Both at the same point, but one is active and one is passive. Remember that where a lot of European and American perspectives see passive as a negative thing, it's definitely not in Asia. It's sort of a fundamental tenet of a lot of Asian religion. But let's consider a Western example that also looks at these two ideas. Dante. Dante also is interested in scholarly meditative faith versus active faith. And both are seen as very valuable in their own realm. Note the two ladies that Dante meets at the top of Purgatory, for an example. So where Buddha's power comes from quiet meditation in India, the Bodhisattva Kuan Yin's power is the power to go out and help people in need, the goddess of mercy. In short, in this chapter, Kuan Yin and her disciple Prince Mosca, or Huigin, go on their journey from India to China. And on the way, they keep running into monsters. The first is a monster in the river Sands, and although at first he attacks, they manage to calm him down and reform him, and set him in place to be a disciple of the scripture seeker. His name, in Waley's translation, is Sandy Priest, or roughly translated, Sand Awakened to Purity. You'll also see him called Sha Wujing in the original. And he is a fascinating character. Look at the way he's described in these chapters. Look at the objects associated with him. And we'll come back to those next time we meet him, and talk more about his symbolism. But for now, see what sort of symbolism you can read into him. They continue on their journey and they run into another monster. It's a pig monster. They convert him and ask him to prepare for the scripture seekers to become his disciple. This character is called Pigsy in Arthur Waley's edition, but his name, Zhu Baji, translates roughly to 9 prohibitions pig, or 9 precepts pig. The pig who should be forbidden from 9 things. I've mentioned him before, he's the one who has trouble keeping his desires in check. Next they come to a river where there is a dragon that fights them. And once again, they convert him and prepare him to meet the scripture seeker. Finally, at last, they come to the mountain where Sun Wukong is still trapped. But they speak to him under the mountain and tell him to prepare for the scripture seeker as well. This is his chance for redemption. Notice how all 4 of these characters needed redemption. They all have made a huge mistake in their past. We know Monkey's in depth because it was the first 7 chapters. Sandy, we see, has the crime of breaking a crystal dish, for which he is given 800 lashes and is being stabbed repeatedly with swords. And his only food is to feed off of travelers. His mistakes have transformed him into a monster. But here, Kuan Yin offers him a chance for redemption, having to wear the skulls of the monks that he's eaten and pay penance for his crime by being a disciple of the scripture seeker. Pigsy is paying for pursuing his lust with the goddess of the moon, and the dragon is the son of the Dragon King, who accidentally set fire to the palace and burned up the pearls of wisdom. There's a lot more to that story, which comes in an episode that isn't included in Whaley's edition. Maybe I'll mention it later on. But the dragon is about to be executed for his crimes, and so Kuan Yin alleviates that sentence and again offers him the path for redemption. All of these characters have a very rough past. All of them are monstrous. It's worth taking time to look closely at their descriptions, because I'm going to talk later about the symbolism and the way their physical features reflect symbolism. And so, Kuan Yin arrives in China, and we move on to chapter 9.
And now for something completely different.
So, we start over with a completely new set of characters and a new plot. It's another backstory. How do all these stories connect? We'll find out eventually, so be patient. For now, I'm just going to recap the chapter, and what I want you to do is think back to those 3 religious philosophies, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and see how those are reflected in this story. Later on, the characters within the story will become very important for further events. The story begins when the Prime Minister Wei Cheng decides that it's time to put forth the examinations. The examinations are a test that anyone can take, and if they do well, they will be given important official positions. So anybody who can read and write, and who can study a little bit, some of the classics, could gain a very powerful position in government, even if you're very poor to start with. A young man named Chen-chou decides to try for the examinations, and his mother encourages him. He is, after all, pretty well read for their village. And in fact, he's so successful that he places first, and is paraded around on horseback, and everyone celebrates his success. He's going to get a really good job. Not only that, but as he's being paraded around, a young woman named Wen-ch'iao looks out her window and sees him and says, "Man, that is a smart guy, that is a handsome guy. I'm getting ready to get married, and I need to select a groom. I want that one." And she throws a ball, which lands on his hat, marking him as her husband. And so Chen-chou suddenly finds himself married. Woo! What a wonderful success story. Shortly thereafter, he's given his official place as the governor of Chiang-chou. And so he and his elderly mother and his new wife begin their journey. On their way, his mother gets sick, and they stop at an inn, hoping that she'll get better. He goes to the market to buy her a fish to refresh her. In the market, he buys a golden carp, which he thinks will make a really nice meal for his mother. But as he's looking at the fish, the eye of the fish glistens in a strange way, and he remembers a story where animals with strange glistening eyes are more than they appear. And so, looking at the fish, he says, "Where did you get this from?" And the person who sold it to him in the market tells him which river it came from. And so, instead of taking it back and cooking it up for his mother, he goes and he releases it into the river. He returns to his mother empty-handed and says, "Mom, I let the fish go that was going to be our dinner because it had that glisten in its eye, and it made me feel like I needed to let it free." And his mother says, "Yes, that respect for nature and that appreciation of the natural world, letting animals go like that, that's a good thing. That shows good character, son, and I'm just as well without it." But his mother was still sick. Chen-chou really needed to continue on to his duties as governor. And because his mother was sick, he decided to go on ahead with his wife and then return for her shortly after when she was feeling better. So he paid for his mother to stay a while longer in the inn, and then he continued on his journey with his wife. They came to the Hung River crossing, and there he met Liu and Li, the 2 ferrymen. Unfortunately, Chen-chou had wronged Li and Liu in a past life, and as they were crossing the river, Liu looked at the lovely Wen-ch'iao, his wife, and decided that he wanted her. And so in the night, while they all slept, Li and Liu killed all the servants and Chen-chou, and threw Chen-chou's body into the water. Liu then took Chen-chou's place, putting on his robes, taking his official documents, and taking Wen-ch'iao, threatening to kill her if she told who he was, and then he went in to take the position as governor. Meanwhile, the body of Chen-chou sank down into the bottom of the river, where the Dragon King lived. Some of the Dragon King's servant yakshas brought the body to the Dragon King, and he recognized Chen-chou as the man who had saved him. That's right! The Dragon King was the Golden Carp! And so, because he's freshly dead, the Dragon King goes and retrieves his soul, and puts it back in his body and says, "Hey, I'll keep you safe down here at the bottom of the river." Chen-chou's wife is heartbroken, and she's disgusted with herself that she's living with this imposter. But she's also pregnant with Chen-chou's child. This makes her very frightened because she knows that Liu will want the baby dead as soon as it's born. One day as Liu is out, she gives birth, and she hears a voice of the spirit of the pole star telling her about how important her child is going to be and how she needs to protect it from Liu. And that all will come right in the end. When Liu comes back, he wants the baby dead because it's not his. Wen-ch'iao doesn't know what to do, but she knows that her child is special and she's got to preserve his life. And so she decides to put him on a plank and let him float down the river. But in order to make sure that she can recognize him again if he ever comes back, she decides to bite off one joint of his little toe. Your toes look so tasty I could just eat them up. Then she writes out a note explaining everything and takes a blanket and wraps the baby in a blanket and puts him on this log and lets it float down the river. Boop, 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 boop. The abbot of the Temple of the Golden Mountain, Fa Ming, finds the baby floating on a plank, picks him up, reads the letter, realizes what's happened, and names the baby River Float. Not Moses this time. The years go by, and the baby grows up into a young man who becomes a monk himself, and takes the name Sansang. Things are going great until one day someone insults him and says, "You don't even know who your parents are!" And Sansang is hurt by this because he wants to know who his parents are. He feels that duty towards his parents. And his desire for a connection to his parents and his past brings him great suffering and sorrow. When he speaks to Fa Ming produces the blanket and the letter, and tells him the story of his parents. Sansang responds by saying, "He who fails to avenge the wrongs done to a parent is unworthy of the name of man. Let me go and find my mother, and I swear that afterwards, with an incense bowl upon my head, I will rebuild this temple and repay your reverence for all that you have done for me." Sansan travels to the town where his mother is, and he presents himself before his mother, telling his secret. She sees the letter and the blanket and is so moved to finally have found her son again, but she can't really talk to him here. So she promises to go visit him at the temple. She then tells Liu, her imposter husband, that she has promised to go donate a whole bunch of shoes to a temple. And she hasn't kept her vow yet. So he says, fine, just go wherever. She goes and takes all the shoes to the temple, and there she reunites with her son. She tells him everything. And then he goes and finds his grandmother, Chen-chou's mother, who was abandoned at the end 17 years ago. She thinks that her son just forgot about her. But Sansang recovers her and pays her debts and takes care of her. And then he returns to his grandfather, his mother's father, who was a minister back in the other city. And when he finds out what has happened to his daughter and how she's been held prisoner by this horrible Liu, he sends an army to go take Liu out. They capture him and drag him to the river, where he killed Chen-chou. And there they slaughter him and sacrifice his organs to the spirit of Chen-chou. The Dragon King hears about the sacrifice, and so he says, "Hey Chen-chou, it's time for you to be reunited with your wife and son. Congratulations!" And so Chen-chou's body floats up to the surface of the water. Wen-ch'iao sees it and is heartbroken all over again. But then he comes back to life, and there he is, reunited with his wife and son. What a fascinating story. Did you hear all the echoes of these different religious philosophies there? Whaley also notably leaves out a few details that the full book gives. Notably that at the end of the story, Wen-ch'iao commits suicide because of the shame that she felt over having been held captive by Liu for so long. Her further pain and inability to overcome that suffering and shame is something that drives Sansang even further into Buddhism. Something that's going to be very important in the future. That's the end of this episode. Thanks for watching. You can click to watch the next episode or to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!